Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Chet 98 of Bava Basra. We are on the bottom of daf Tzadik Zayin Amabet 97b. We are at the Mishnah, and we are discussing sales of wine. We have been discussing for the last two chapters and into this third chapter, so chapters 4, 5, and 6 of Bava Basra have been discussing what happens when you have an unspecified contract. So we've been dealing with variety of contracts. If you buy a house, if you buy a field, what's included? If I don't tell you all of the details, what's definitely included? If you buy a boat, does it necessarily include the mast? Of course, the answer is yes. Again, unless you specify otherwise. So the point is all those kind of details are what we're talking about. And so the question is, now we're dealing with food spoilage. And this is, of course, a concept that we all understand. I think we've all probably bought a gallon of milk and then gotten home, and a day or two later, we found out that it's spoiled, and maybe before the date, maybe we didn't realize the date that was on it. But in any event, the point is that these are things that actually come up all the time. Although we have certain conclusions that the Mishnah and Gemara are going to draw on, or reach, I do want to note that in the end, the halacha ends up being that you follow the custom. And so, here in this country, most places are going to take back that milk if it's within the date. If even though probably they would have a claim similar to the ones that we've been talking about, often we will say that, and indeed, I think we'll see even today, where the seller has the ability to say to the buyer, listen, how do I know that you didn't ruin the item? And it's all because of your action that the wine spoiled. And we do say that that's actually a valid complaint. But of course, from a customer service perspective, it's probably not the greatest strategy. So, okay, so let's dive right in. Third line from the bottom on Tzadik Zayin Amabet, the Mishnah. So hamocher yayin lechavero, you're selling wine to your friend. Vehechmitz, and now it became vinegar. Eno chayev ba'achriyuso. The seller is not responsible for the loss. Let's take a look at the Rashbam. We're going to jump right in with the Rashbam as Mark highlighted. Eno chayev, third line from the very bottom of the Rashbam on Tzadik Zayin Amabet. Hamocher, the seller's not responsible. Ba'achrioto, he's not responsible. The b'shas mechira yayin hava, because at the time that it was sold, it was wine. Meaning, if you sell something and it's good, then that's what you're selling it for this moment. You're not necessarily selling it for the future. However, the imya dua she'eno machmitz. However, I'm sorry, sheyeno machmitz. If on the other hand, if the seller knows that his wine always spoils a week later, okay, well then hareze mekachtos. That is not meaning it spoils earlier than it's expected to spoil, then wine should be expected to spoil. If the person knows that that's the case, well, then that's a mistaken transaction, and the parties can undo it. The and let's take a look at the Rashbam here as well, and then we'll do a Tosfos as well. So the again, third line, end of the line. Third line from the bottom end of the line, if he knows that it's going to become vinegar, but kol shana, meaning if every year he sees it, hareze mekoktos, this is a mistaken transaction. And we will explain in the Gemara, we're going to establish in the Gemara, that we're talking about where a situation where the buyer said that he is using it for cooking. Now, it's interesting because, of course, today we think of cooking wine as a lower quality wine. In those days, they thought of cooking as a higher quality wine because the wine needed to last. We will see, I think, on today's daf, how when you have wine that is for cooking, you don't use it all at once. So if I tell you, Stan, that I am going to need this wine for cooking, you know that I need it to last for days and days, if not weeks and weeks. Wow. And so if you know in that situation that the wine that you're selling me it always spoils within that time frame, well, then you shouldn't sell it. And if you did sell it, it would be an invalid transaction. Because if in fact now Rashbam continuing on the second to last line, if Rashbam is saying that if I as the buyer didn't tell Stan as the seller that I was buying it for cooking, Lama so why should Stan be liable for be in any way responsible? Hare haya yachol lishto. So I could have drunk it during the time that it was good wine. And Stan didn't tell me to wait. That even if in fact he knew that I was going to hold most of it for later. We have seen over and over again over the last few weeks that we do not follow the majority in a transaction when the question is about money. You have to basically, the obligation is on the parties to the transaction to specify and to explicitly make it clear that it's for cooking, and only then will the seller be responsible. And certainly in an ordinary case where you're just doing a little bit for waiting and a little bit for immediately drinking. So in that situation, we're going to say that the seller is responsible. Vim Amar Lo, if the seller says to the buyer, Yayin, and now we go to Tzadik Chet Amud Aleph, Yayin Muvusam Ani Mocher Loch, I'm selling you wine that it has been flavored, well then, Chayev Lahamid Lo Ad Hadzeres. That flavoring is an indication that it is going to last at least through Shavuos. Now, that means usually, I guess, the grapes are probably pressed in the fall, and so you have basically a couple of months for it to work out. Oh, I didn't do the Tosfos. We'll go back and do the Tosfos after we finish the Mishnah. But here we have. Let's take a look at the Rashbam Ad Hadzeres. Why is Shavuos such an important date? Aval lo min Hadzeres ve'elach. But not from Shavuos on, Shechom Dekufas Tammuz, because the heat of the summer, of the time of Tammuz is, of course, the month after Sivan, which is the month in which Shavuos takes place. Mekalkel, that heat will ruins wine, Afil Yayim Mevusam, and will even ruin wine that has been flavored. Okay, and now Tosfos here notes the following. Mevuzam ad atzeres, kasha l'Rashba. The Rashba wants to understand. This Mishnah, as we will see in the Gemara, is talking about where the wine has been put from the seller's containers into the buyer's containers. So why can't the seller say, and this is a question that Ken has asked several times over the course of this, and Tosfos is asking that question here, kan kancha garim, that it was your vessels. So Stan should tell me that it was my vessels that ruined the wine. He shouldn't be liable until Shavuos. Rav Chia bar Yosef lemale mazal chagarem, and we will see an opinion by Rav Chia bar Yosef, who says that when it comes to wine, effectively the seller's never responsible, or in general never responsible, because it is based on the whoever owns it. It's their luck, and indeed that we'll see that it's tied to, is the person a haughty person, and a haughty person will often have their wine spoil in a sort of tit for tat kind of world. That in fact a person who is haughty often puts on airs that he's not entitled to. And similarly, the wine is putting on airs that it's not entitled to. It's not really wine. It's actually vinegar. So the
Rashbam mentioned this in the daf, I think 2 days ago. He talked about mazal. That was
correct. We're going to see that.
So that's the Rashbam. Now Tosfos seem to be adopting the Rashbam's.
No. No, we're going to see Rabbi Chia bar Rav Yosef is going to come up in our Gemara today. This is an opinion of the Gemara, and it is arguably the conclusion of the Gemara. So it's not as if Tosfos is adopting Rashbam's opinion or vice versa. They're both highlighting the fact that the Gemara itself will reach that conclusion. So again, the question fundamentally that Tosfos is asking is, why can't Stan blame my actions for the fact that the wine didn't make it until Atzeres, until Shavuos? So B'yesh Lomar Devadai im nimtza chometz matzi amar hachi. So Tosfos answers that actually we have to reread the Mishnah, because the truth is that Stan does have that right to make that claim against me. Aval hacha lo iri bahachi. But here we're not talking about that situation. Ella ashma'inen ditzarek litain lo yayin hara'oi lihit kayem ad ha'atzeres. He needs to give me wine that is capable of lasting until Shavuos. And so as a result, if I bring in Mark the scientist, and Mark the scientist says, Stan, this wine is not capable of making it to Shavuos. It doesn't make a difference what vessel David's got it in. The problem is right now, when I buy it from Stan, I will take it to my local expert, my local wine expert, and he will reach a conclusion. And so as a result, it's not about whether the wine will spoil before Shavuos. The point is the wine capable of lasting?
Beyond Yom Kippur?
Yes, well, we're going to be fasting on Yom Kippur, exactly.
You think it will last the wine?
Well, I do think the wine will last through Yom Kippur. I hope so. It's got to last all the way until Shavuos. That's all the way until May in the coming year, I think. So, all right.
Similar to the case earlier, where not exactly, but it's similar to the case of the seeds, where the seeds, they planted the seeds, and were bad seeds. But if we know with certainty that the seller sold the seeds bad, then it's his achrayut. But if the guy doesn't plant them, doesn't fertilize them, then the buyer has achrayut on the
100%. 100%. You are absolutely right. I think that there is a very strong correlation between this case and the seed case that we saw before. That if we know that the seeds are invalid seeds. Indeed, Tosfos asked this question and came up with a very similar answer. He explains that Mishnah as talking about a situation where we have sort of separate evidence that the seeds are not capable of
exactly
fruits.
Right, yeah, exactly. If you know from outside evidence, right?
Exactly. But Yashan Michel Ishtakat. Now, sorry, go ahead, Stacy.
Forgive my ignorance, but aren't there strict laws and oversight for making the wine also? Like, how do we verify that the producer, followed all the rules?
That's a good question. So here we're dealing with a situation. The Mishnah is assuming that at the moment of the transaction, we know that it's good wine. But you're absolutely right that of course that would be part of the requirement. If it turns out that we know that somebody with a toe fungus was crushing the wine and the wine was not good, that would obviously be a mekach tos as well. And I think it's sort of being highlighted that even in this kind of situation, we would say that it's a mekach tos, it's a mistaken sale. So certainly if the seller did something wrong. So now the Mishnah concludes with two qualifications, noting that what things mean. That if we agree, vayashan, if I say that that if Stan tells me that he's selling yashan wine, then it means Michel ishtakad. It means that it's at least last year. Old wine means last year. Miyushan, if it's aged wine, then it means Michel Gimel Shanim. It means from 3 years. Now, what exactly does from 3 years mean? Rashbam explains, because we're going to see it in the Gemara. It's the fourth line in the Rashbam at the top of Tzadik Chedem and Aleph. Mishana dekodem ishtakad. It's from the year before last year. Dahavu lahu Gimel Shanim, because now you've got 3 years. You've got the current year, You've got the past year, and then you've got the year that it was made. Im shana she'anu omdim ba, and that ends up being 3 years if you include the current year that you have today. So that's the Rashbam's explanation. Now let's go back to that Tosos at the bottom. A lot of the action is right here on this daf, and so then we'll be going a little bit more quickly through the rest of the daf. The im yadua she'enu machmet chai b'achriyusa. So it's the last Tosos Tzadik Zayin Amabet. If you know that that it's going to go bad, then you're responsible. The kashalari, the Re wants to know the Amar Abaye be'ezu neshach in Bava Metzia, excuse me. We saw that Abaye made the following statement: Shari leila inish limitan zuze lechabre achavis yayin. That I can give Stan money for a barrel of wine, ulmeimar, and I can say hachi. I can say the following: Iyikare izula, if it goes up in value or if it goes down in value, birushusi, it is going up or down in value in my property. The takfa, but if it's spoiled, so birshutcha, then you are taking responsibility. You are the seller. I'm making this transaction on the condition that you are selling me good stuff. And I know that I'm responsible if the price goes up or the price goes down, but I do not want to take responsibility. I want a guarantee is essentially what I'm saying. And Abaye is saying that it is permitted for me to say that. Vahashta, so my kamash malan Abaye. But really, if you think about it, what is Abaye saying that is different from our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is saying that the buyer has that exact same right. Because if I tell you that I am buying it limekapeh, that I'm buying it for cooking, then again, if it spoils, it's on you. But if the price goes up or down, it's for me. So can't you learn Abaye's lesson from this Mishnah? Masnisinhi. This is a Mishnah. Hacha, right here. Im yadua sheyeno machmitz. That if you knew that it was going to spoil, chayabach yuso, you're responsible for the damages. Even though if it goes up or down in value, that change in price is for the buyer, Havia. And similarly, if it's in the containers of the seller, even if he doesn't know that it's going to spoil, then he's going to be responsible because I never put it into my vessels. So I never took an action. So it's clear that you were responsible for anything bad that happened. And that which we ask over there, so this now raises an issue of charging interest. One of the restrictions associated with charging interest is that we cannot make a deal where it's very likely for me to win and very unlikely for you to win. So, for example, if I were to make a deal where I lend you money and I basically say that, and I lend you money to run a business, right, and you run the business, and I say, you know what, this is not actually a loan. This is actually an investment in your business. And if the value of your business goes up, I get to share in that profit. But if the value of the business goes down, all the losses are yours. Now, some people might be willing to take that deal because they're confident in themselves. They may not have other options, but the Jewish law says that is not permitted, that is too much like a loan with interest. Because even though I'm not necessarily going to get paid interest, because if it goes down in value, you're just going to treat it like a loan and you're just going to pay me back what I owed. But I have the opportunity, so I have upside, but no downside. That is what we generally mean when we say karov l'schar v'rachok lehefsid, that it's easy for me to have profits, but it's hard for me to have a loss. And so, who tikshi slay? So that the question is, so I'm sorry. So havitikshele amas nisin. So the question that Tosfos is asking, why are we asking that question on Abaye's statement in Ezehu Neshech And why are we not asking that question on this Mishnah? Shouldn't our Mishnah be a situation of Karav Laskar Rachel Hefsid? Because after all, I get the value if it goes up, and I have protection on the downside. Not full protection in this case, but I have some protection on the downside. So shouldn't we ask the question? Now, you might have noticed that we used a slightly different word in the Gemara. The Gemara used a slightly different word in Ezehu Neshech. It used the word spoiled as opposed to becoming vinegar. Dahacha, which we use over here. Daha Amar Babrachos, but that's not going to be the answer. You can't give that as the answer because we learned in Maseches Brachos, Rav Huna Tekifule Arba Meya Dani Dechamra Ayakar Chala. So that he had 400 barrels spoil, but the price of vinegar went up. The Izvin b'dei chamra, and he was able to sell it with the price of vinegar. He was able to, as if it was the price of wine. So as a result, we see in this one statement in Maseches Brachos the word tekifu, spoiled, along with the word, along with the fact that it was vinegar that he sold. So that is the product of the machmitz, of the spoilage. So it can't be that alma hakol echad. Both of these words are talking about the same thing. So we've got that first question is, why don't we ask on this situation about the fact that it sounds like a little bit like a related prohibition to ribis of karav l'skar v'rachok lahefsek. V'od kashalari dema ribis shayach sham. Why are we even, so now the re goes in the opposite direction and says, actually, what's even the question over there about it being ribis? Ha-itakva habi mekok, because after all, if it's spoiled in this situation by Abaye, well, then it would be an invalid sale. So if it spoils, it's an invalid sale. So why should there be any question about Abaye's statement? Clearly, a buyer is able to say that if it spoils, it's on you. De igli milsa, it ends up, if it spoils, it reveals the fact that it was always not good. Shalo hayasofa lehiskayim, that it wasn't a good wine. So, but Yeshlomer, so the Tosfos answers the following: De Abaye ashminan afilu bechamra diyadinan be sheroy lehitkayim. That actually the difference is here we're dealing with a situation of wine that we know no knowledge about. Maybe it's going to spoil, maybe it's not going to spoil. And of course, in the Mishnah's case, the stand knows as the seller that it is likely to spoil. But in the case by Abaye, we're dealing with wine that we know is good and that ordinarily would never spoil. And even there, afilu hachi mikaba aleh mocher itakav machmas shum davar machmas chom o machmas tiltol o machmas deshani bebarza. That even in that situation where it is good wine that should last for a long, long time, the seller has the ability to take on the liability associated with anything bad happening, whether that's something bad happening because of heat or because of movement or because you move the spigot in the barrel. In all of these situations, and we will see that these are three things that could potentially cause wine spoilage. Nonetheless, we're going to say that the seller has the ability, and therefore it is a little bit comparable to charging interest. Because the bottom line is that the seller is providing a major additional protection that the buyer is not in any way entitled to. And so as a result, that does look a little bit more like interest, about protecting the downside risk to the buyer. We're not talking about wine that's fit to last for a long time. And therefore, we can say that the transaction from the very beginning wasn't a valid sale, when the wine ends up going to vinegar. And in the end, it revealed itself. And the end shows the beginning. that the wine was never fit to last. Below mixed karibis klal. And so therefore, our situation doesn't look like ribis at all, so we don't bother with the question. And the situation over in Maseches Bava Metzia looks a little bit more like a karav l'skar, rachok lehefsid, like a situation where you make a loan where you have downside protection and upside potential. Okay,
So are we
now,
forcing the seller then to provide extra protection to
yes,
the buyer?
but the bottom line is if the buyer insists on it and the seller agrees, then the seller has that additional responsibility. This is showing that it is a halakhic permitted thing to do to provide a real good guarantee. If you want to provide a guarantee to something, the halakha says that that is a valid transaction. We're not going to undermine that kind of transaction. We're not going to say that that the buyer is taking advantage of the seller, because again, we can see it in our modern day that the value that we all place on a transaction that provides a good guarantee.
But it doesn't seem like if the seller agrees to this, it doesn't seem like it would be ribit on his part.
Yes, that was Tosas's question, and the answer is that we were dealing with really good wine, and so as a result, you're providing protection that is way over and above what is necessary under halacha, and that's why maybe we could view this. And again, in the end, the Gemara over there concludes it's not ribis. Right? It's not going to be ribis. But if maybe because you provided something way beyond what is necessary, maybe it looks a little bit like this potentially rabbinically prohibited transaction.
But on the part of the ribbit, but even if we were to think that, on whose part would it be ribbit?
It would be the seller would be giving interest to the buyer, because let's say that the product actually goes bad. Well, then in that situation, the seller is effectively returning to the buyer the money that was used for the purchase. That is like the return of a loan. And so what we have in this situation is the possibility of viewing the transaction like a loan, but with the possibility of making money if the price of the wine goes up. And so that is a transaction that is referred to as karav l'skar rachok lehefsid, and therefore that's the situation. We can go over that concept further later, but I want to because we need to get going. But that's the basic concept. So Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says Lo shanu el bekankanim de lokech. We're now on the Gemara. We're now in the third line on Sadak Chadam Aleph. So we're talking where the situation is where the buyer's vessels are being used. But if everything is still in the vessels of Stan, the seller, so Amr Lei, I can say to him, Ha-chamrucha, ha-kan-kan-chach. Here, here's your wine, here's your kegs, meaning it's your responsibility. If my food is in your stuff, then any spoilage has got to be your fault. My hobby. Well, 1 second, who cares if it's the seller's stuff? Why can't the seller say, you shouldn't have waited? So lo tzricha de amrle lemikba. So we have to say that actually what we're dealing with is where it was where the buyer said this to the seller that it's for cooking. And as we explained, the cooking means that you're not going to use it right away. You're going to hold on to it. As Rashbam explains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up from within the narrow lines of the Rashbam, 8 lines from the bottom of those narrow lines. To Amrle lemakba lehistapek ma'at ma'at. You're going to end up taking out a little bit at a time, likaderos, for other containers, which means that you're going to be waiting. So that's a key point, that when you actually use it for cooking, you're not using it all at the same time. Umay doke de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, and what forced Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, la ukma l'masnisin bekan kanim blokeh, to say that we're talking about the buyer's vessels? Why say that? Why not and to say that the buyer told the seller it was for cooking. Let it be that it was in the seller's vessels, and say that he didn't say anything about cooking, and say that that's that in that situation you're not going to be liable. After all, the statement is about not being liable. And the beginning statement of our Mishnah. So Amarava Masnisin Kashite. It was the rest of that Mishnah that was going to become difficult. To Katani, because the next line of the Mishnah said, Im Yadush Yeno Machmitz, if you know that your wine is going to spoil, Harezem Mekoktos. Well, then it's not a good sale. Well, Amai, why should it not be a good sale? Le Malay, Loi Bai Lach L'Shahuye. Can't the seller say that you shouldn't have kept the wine so long? So elalav shma mina de amar leila mikba. So it must be that you said that the buyer said that he was going to hold it, meaning the seller knew that the buyer was going to hold it. And then if the seller knows that the buyer is going to hold it, well, then the seller can't tell the buyer, why did you hold it so long? So shma mina. So we learned from that it had to be dealing with a buyer who told the seller that it was used for cooking. And once we say that, well, then the question is why wouldn't there be liability if in the ordinary case? And so as a result, we have to say that it's in the kankanim of the buyer. Okay, upliga de Rav Chia Bar Yosef, and here we have the statement of Rav Chia Bar Yosef that
we're clearly reading something into the Mishnah there that the Mishnah didn't say that.
Yes, 100%. This is a read into the Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi is saying that we must be talking about the buyer's vessels and the buyer telling the seller that he's using it for cooking. Upliga de Rav Yosef, de Rav Chia Bar Yosef. And now all of this a view of Rabbi Yossi is argues with Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, because Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says, the Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, Chamra Mazla de Mare Garim, that when it comes to wine, the spoilage is all about the fortunes or luck of the owner. Shneamar Av Ki Hayayin Boged Gever Yahir, that the wine betrays. And then the pasuk continues, an arrogant man. So this is a pasuk in Chabakuk, Parak Bet, pasuk Hey. And so the implication is that wine will betray an arrogant man. So Amar Rav Mari explains, Hi man de Yahir, that a person who's arrogant, afilu inshe beise lo mikabel. Even the people of his own house are not going to take him at face value. Shneamar Gever Yahir. Below Yinveh. The end of that pasuk is an arrogant man, his abode will not endure. My lo Yinveh, what does it mean that his abode will not endure? Binaveh shalo, that even in his own home, he is not going to be viewed as a serious person. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol HaMisga'eh B'Talis Shel Tamid Chacham. Once we talk about haughtiness, anybody who treats themselves as like a Talmud Chacham. The Rashbam actually interprets this very literally, and actually means that you wear the garb of a Talmud Chacham, ve'eno Talmud Chacham, and in fact he's not a Talmud Chacham. Ein machnisin oto b'machitza so shal kadosh baruch hu. You don't end up going within the curtains of God in the world to come, because ksiv hacha v'lo yinveh, right? It says in connection with his abode will not endure. So ksiv hasam el nevei katshecha. So in reference, this is a pasuk in Shmot Perek Tesvav pasuk Yigimel, with that to your holy abode is referring to Hashem's holy abode, and so as a result, we're going to understand that the abode that's not going to endure is the fact that you won't get to go into the area of Hashem in the world to come. So again, it highlights the importance of being not putting on airs. So Amar Rava. So now Rava says, so again, we have these two different opinions as to what the situation is. According to Rav Chia Bar Yosef, basically wine is determined by the owner, and so any kind of spoilage is going to be the owner's responsibility, and Rav Yosef Bar Rabbi Chanina is focused on no, if there's a possibility of your having done something, of the other person did something wrong, well then we're going to have you be that person who did something wrong is going to be liable. So let's take a look and see, as that will come up further. So Amar Rava, if you sell a barrel of wine to a shopkeeper, and you do so that he is going to sell the wine gradually, and he ends up selling a half or 2/3, so that all that is left is a half or a third. Dinahu to Makabala Mine. The seller's got to take it back, meaning that the seller knows that when the buyer bought it from him, he was going to take it in order to do this with it. So it needed to be able to last. And obviously the seller is effectively paying the shopkeeper to sell the product for him. He's got to take the responsibility for that product. The low amran, ela delo shane bebarza. But it's got to be a situation where the shopkeeper didn't change the location of the spigot. Aval shani bebarza, but if it changed the location of the spigot, low. Then the seller is not going to be responsible. The original seller is not going to be responsible. The shopkeeper is responsible because he did something wrong. The low amran ela delo mata yoma deshuka, and it's also required where we're dealing where the spoilage happened before the market day came. About mata yoma deshuka, low. But once the market day comes, we're assuming that you should sell all of your product on the market day. This is not Costco, where there's always product on the shelf. The point is that at the end of the market day, the seller who's selling your product is responsible for selling it out. V'amar Rava, Haiman de Kabel Chamra, and Rava said further that one who accepts a wine, Adaita de Mamamte Leila Farvasa Devol, Devol Shvat, where you're planning to bring it to Vol Shvat. So some location, meaning that, and why? Adamate Hasam Zal, because, and then by the time he got there, the price went down. So the point is that so Stan sells me his wine on the basis and tells me that I should take the wine because I'm going to be his marketing guy, and I should take the wine to San Francisco because the price of wine is great in San Francisco. But unfortunately, by the time I get there, Mark and Moshe and Stacy have all brought their wine to San Francisco, so the price has gone down. So Dinahu de Makabale, Stan needs to be willing to accept whatever I get for it, meaning that all the loss is on Stan because he's the one who told me to take it to San Francisco. Ibaylahu havachala mai. So 1 second. Now the question is, what happens if on my way to San Francisco, it became vinegar? So do we say that, so let's take a look at the Rashbam. Havachala, it's 1, 2, 3, 6, 9 lines up in the Rashbam on the bottom of Tzaddik Chenem Aleph, Havachala, Mikamei de Amataye Lahasam, that it became vinegar before he got there. So what do we say? Mi Makabel Bal Hayayin Kol Hafsid. Do we say that Stan, as the owner of the wine, accepts all the loss? Daha Afilu Gabi Mechira, Gemura Makabel Mishum, Da Amar Leilo Keach, Chamarka, Vahakankanka. Do we say that, look, I could have told Stan, here's your wine, here's your vessels, it's all on you. Hecha de Amar Le Lamakba, wherever I tell you that it is for cooking. Delo matzi Amar Le Mocher Loi Bailach L'Shahuya, because Stan doesn't have the right to say back to me, you shouldn't have waited. And certainly here, Stan can't say that I shouldn't have waited. Delo macher legamri. He didn't sell the wine at all to me. Rather, I'm taking it on consignment. I'm selling it on his behalf. V'gam amrle zil amtaye Farvasta the Tvol and Shvat. And moreover, he told me to go over to San Francisco, Tvol Shvat, as in this case. Shitsiva lahashoto, you told me to wait. Dematzi Amarle, Makabel, that here I can say back to him, Hakamracha, Hakankancha, here's your wine, and here's your vessels. So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, just like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina allows me to say, "Oh Dilma lo makabel kol hafsid," or maybe Stan shouldn't be taking fully responsibility. Ella palga, he should only be partially responsible. Dematzi Amrle, because Stan can tell me mazal chanami garam. Your luck, your fortunes were part of what happened here. Shiba achrayas shaninu omed vahayayin boged karina they karav chia bar Yosef, and we say that the wine betrays. So maybe Stan should be able to say that I am partially responsible. So what do we say in that situation? So back into the Gemara.
So who's partially responsible? The original owner?
So the question is, do we say that the original owner is fully responsible, or do we say that there's a joint responsibility? The original owner is partially responsible because he's the one who told me to wait because I had to take it all the way to San Francisco, and before I got there, it spoiled. And I'm partially responsible because according to Rabbi Chanina, according to Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, I'm partially responsible because wine betrays the nature of its owner. So those are the two possibilities. So do we say that
the wine?
What? Yeah, I never made it all the way to San Francisco. So who do you think I should be responsible? You think Stan should be responsible or me?
You.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Well, that's the same person then. The person who
Exactly. Sorry.
That's the same person. If you say the owner has bad luck, then and he's the one who got.
So excellent point. So the question. So clearly, the Gemara understands that when we say that the owner's bad luck, we're no longer referring to Stan because it's in my possession and it has been handed over to me. And so, on some ways, the nature of my behavior is going to determine whether or not the wine will spoil.
But you're not the owner.
Even though I'm not officially
you're the middleman who's
correct.
Selling it on behalf of the owner.
Correct. Even so, clearly that's the Rashbam's understanding. I mean, the Rashbam says it in those words explicitly. So let's go and see what the Gemara answers. So Amrle, third line from the bottom, near the end of the line. Amrle Rav Hillel Rav Ashi Ki Havan Bar Rav Kahana. When we were at Rav Kahana's yeshiva, Amrlan, he said to us, Chala lo, that if the wine became vinegar, the owner does not bear the entire loss. Udulok Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, and we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, meaning that we paskin like Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. That and so as a result, the Ika Amri, but there are those who say afilu chala nami makabel, that even if the wine became vinegar, the owner does have to accept the full loss. Kaman, who is this like? Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, like Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina. So we have these two views. Now let's take a look at the last Rashbam, because actually we can just look at the second to last line, because this is what I think is the most interesting. In the middle of the second to last line, maybe 7 words into the line, the Nira be'enai delays hilchos like Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina. That the Rashbam says that he doesn't think that the halakha is like Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, notwithstanding the fact that the second version, the second answer, and often the second Ika Amri is usually how we paskin. The Rashbam says that he does not think that the halakha is like Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, elik Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, but rather the halakha is like Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. The mazla de garav gavra garim, that the person's fortunes, that's the cause of any kind of damage, meaning caveat emptor, that you have that it's whoever beware. The buyer beware. Exactly. Ella im kain yadua sheyano machmitz. So only in a situation of somewhat fraud. It's not quite full fraud, but somewhat fraud. But that only when Stan knows it's going to spoil within a certain amount of time, and I tell him I need it for beyond that time, Daha Shmuel Koi Kavasa, because actually Shmuel held like that, but Amrin La'el, and we saw on Daf Tzadik Vavam Bet, Ovid Rav Yosef Ubdud B'chamra Kavase to Shmuel, that Rav Yosef actually paskined like that. So again, interesting conclusion that we end up, at least according to the Rashbam, concluding full caveat emptor, where your buyer really needs to be beware, and therefore, if you're the buyer, you want to specify the details. This is true, certainly true in modern law today as well. Okay.
Which Rashbam was that?
That last Rashbam on Daf Tzadik Chaim Bet, we began the reading of the Rashbam on the second to last line. Very, very, very important Rashbam for this topic. All right, so Yashan Michel Ishtaket. We said in the Mishnah that we began with today that if you sold wine from last year, if you sold old wine, you mean the previous year, and if you sold aged wine, it needs to be 3 years. So the Gemara is going to talk about the 3-year concept. So as we turn to Tzaddik Chet Bet, Tana, we have a brisa umiyashen v'holech ad hachag, that if it's aged wine, it needs to last until Sukkot. Meaning that it needs to last the 3rd full year. That usually the year begins, as we are going to have, maybe we can consider this a Daf Yomi coincidence. We're going to about to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, and after that Yom Kippur, and then after that Sukkot. So that's very, very close to Sukkot. And the point is that you need to, the wine needs to be able to last that amount of time. So that way it ends up being 3 full years. Okay. So
is that after the Shavuot of that year, or is that the next?
Yes, after the Shavuot of that year. Exactly. After the Shavuot of that year. Okay. So now we're going to change topics that we're done with wine, at least for now. And now I sell a place to his friend, or if I buy a place from my friend, la'asoslo Beis chasnus livno, in order to build a wedding house for his son, ubeit almanos libito, or a widow house for his daughter. Bona arba amos al sheish. It needs to be at least 4 by 6 amos. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's what Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, refes bakar hizu. What are you talking about? That's just a barn, meaning that's too small. And we're going to see that it's not clear exactly what Rabbi Yishmael is saying. The Gemara will clarify. Harotzil asos refes bakar. If you want to build a cattle barn, bona arba amos al sheish. Well, then it's got to be 4 by 6 amos. And again, as a reminder, an amma is about 1.5 feet to 2 feet, so you can multiply and get the distances for yourself. Bias katan sheish al chet. 6 by 8 is for a small house. Gadol ches al eser. A large house is 8 by 10. You can see that we're talking about very small houses in those days. Traklin yud al yud, an entryway or the Gemara is going to define exactly what we mean by a traklin, is 10 by 10. Rumo, and how high does it need to be? Kachatzi arko v'chatzi rakbo. You add the length and the height, length and the width, and you divide by 2. So again, in a case, so Raya Ladavar, and what's the proof? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Kevinyan HaHeichel, like the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was the Heichel, the room of the Kodesh was 40 by 20, and it was 30 amos tall. So 40 plus 20 is 60, divided by 2 is 30. So we see that you have the you take the length and the width and you add it together and you divide by 2, and that gets you to the right number. So lamali lamisna beis chasnus livno uveis almanus levito. Why did the Mishnah focus on a wedding house for the son and a widow house for the daughter? Lidne beis chasnus livno ulevito. They let them have a wedding house for both a son or a daughter. Ubeit almanut, and a widow house, live no uvito. I mean, those good things and bad things can happen both to your sons and to your daughters. So, milza agav orche kamashmalan. It's teaching us something, by the way. Delo darka the chasana lemedar bechamuha. That it's not a good idea for a son-in-law to live in the house of his father-in-law. What's the evidence of that? Keduksiv b'sefer ben Sira, as it was written in the book of Ben Sira, So, hakol shakalti b'kaf moznaim. I weighed everything on a balance scale. V'lo matzati kal misubin, and I found nothing lighter, meaning nothing worse than misubin from bran, meaning that bran is not a good product. Obviously, they didn't understand the health benefits, I guess, of bran, or maybe it could be a different kind of bran than what we refer to as bran today. But kal misubin, but yet worse than bran is chasan hadar bebeis chamiv, a son-in-law who lives in his father-in-law's house. But kal mechasan, and worse than even that son-in-law, oreach machnis oreach, is a guest who brings a guest with him. So this is a classic, right? I mean, your guest shows up, and then all of a sudden, instead of hosting two people, you're hosting four people. You know, that's not good. The kalma oreach, and worse than even that guest, meshiv davar b'terem yishma, a person who gives an answer before he's heard the complete and understood the question. Shenemar meshiv davar b'terem yishma. If you give an answer before you've heard, iveles he lo uchlima. It's folly for him, and it causes embarrassment, because often, and I certainly have learned this lesson in conversations with my wife, I need to listen to her whole statement before I try to respond. That's a very important thing. And I'm having you all listen as I talk to myself. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael Omer.
Is the Gemara saying Dafka bebeit chamiv, or could it be chamato as well, his mother-in-law?
Well, the reason that the son-in-law shouldn't be in the home of his father-in-law is because of the relationship between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law. Mm-hmm. So this is one of many, many Gemarot that highlight that in-law relationships are somewhat complicated.
It's a little interesting, just as a point here, that one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of our generation was Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he lived in his mother-in-law's house.
Interesting. Yeah, so it does.
Years.
Very, very interesting. Yishkach, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that piece of information. So, by the way, I don't know whether this is actually quoted lahalacha. I don't think well, actually, maybe it is. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it is. So obviously, I'm sure he had good reasons. But okay, let's finish up the daf for today. So Rabbi Yishmael Omer Refes Bakar Hi Zu Harotzel Asos, that we said that this a cattle barn is if you do 4x6. So Refes Bakar. So Man Ketani Law. How do we understand it? Who taught this? Ikadam Rabbi Yishmael Ketani Law. Rabbi Akiva Ketani Law. Some people said it was Rabbi Yishmael. Some people said it was Rabbi Akiva. Ikadam Rabbi Akiva Ketani Law. Some people said Rabbi Akiva said it. V'haki Kamar, and this is what he was saying. Afal Pisha Refes Bakar Hi. Even though it's the size of a cattle barn, there are times that people will make it that small. So, of course, that's not how we read it, but that's another way you could read this Mishnah. And there are some who taught it as Rabbi Yishmael taught it, and of course, that's how we taught it. That if how can you say that is the case, that this is the size? Because one who wishes to build a cattle barn builds it by 4 amos by 6 amos. Okay, so traklin yud by yud, yud al yud. So a traklin is 10 by 10. My traklin, kuvta bevarde. It's a pavilion with roses. So basically, it's like an open space in the backyard. Tiny the kanter shtemisrei al shtemisrei, and a kanter is 12 by 12. My kanter terbat apadne. It's a courtyard of a mansion, meaning it's a large backyard in those days was going to be 12 by 12, under 24 feet by 24 feet. So just to give you a sense of the smaller sizes that people lived in. Rumoka, we should all be thankful for the space that we have. Rumo chakatzi arko chakatzi rachbo. The height needs to be half the length plus half the width. Raya Ladavar, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer Kevinyan HaHechel. So Raya Ladavar man katanila. So who taught this, that it's a proof? Ika de Amar. Now, of course, we have that as Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, but Some people say there was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel v'haki kamar, and this is what he was saying. Raya ladavar minai, and how do I know that in fact it's supposed to be half the width plus the length? Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel hakol kivinyan ha'hekel, and everything should be like the Beis Hamikdash. V'iga da Amar Tanakama katani la, and some people say that it was the Tanakama who taught it. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel atzmua kamasna tama, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was asking the question. V'haki kamar like the Tanakama, and this is what he was saying to the Tanakama. Raya minayan, where's your proof? Binyan ha'hechel, from the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Atukuli alma kebinyan hechel avdi. Does everybody in the world have to build like the Beis Hamikdash? And Tanya, acherim omrim rumo b'karoso. Some people say that, others say a new opinion that it's not the height needs to be half the width plus the length, but rather the height needs to be equal to just the length. So of the beams. Velema rumo karachbo. Why not just say that the height needs to be like the width? Why are you saying that it's got to be the connecting it to the beams? What's the difference between those two? So ibayzema besam ila ravach. Maybe the house gets wider at the top, so as a result, the beams are wider than the width at the floor, and therefore you need to give the extra height. And ibayzema mishum deika kave, or maybe there are sockets that are in the side of the roof framework, and so as a result, the beams are actually larger, and one can understand, right? The beams have to go on the walls. So as a result, those beams are going to be longer than the actual actual width itself. And so it's interesting to think, is this a more strict opinion? Meaning, does that mean that it's going to be higher, or is it going to be lower? So of course, the question is the width of the house the smaller of the length in the width direction, or is it the larger of the two directions? And that is, of course, not clear from this Gemara, but we will pick up from this location, 4 lines from the bottom, God willing, tomorrow, and look forward to continuing our learning together.
One quick question.
Yes.
Regarding that earlier Tosa we're learning with who is responsible, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the seller would take all the responsibility, right? And we
Correct.
thought it might be like Ribbit.
Yeah.
Now, if this price, we were saying that if the price changes, that would be the concern, Ribbit, right?
No, if the price changes, so then everybody.
Then he might gain something.
The
right?
buyer gets the benefit and takes the loss in that situation.
The
right?
buyer gets the benefit so that would be look to Elu like a rebit, right? Because
the issue is that if it goes up, then yes, it would look a little bit like he's getting
extra.
rebit. Exactly, he's getting extra, because if the price goes down to 0 because it became vinegar, he would actually get all of his money back. So in that situation, it's like a loan, and in the situation where the price goes up, it's like a loan plus interest.
I see. Okay.
Exactly. In the end, again, we don't say that.
Right.
In the end, we conclude that it is not a ribis transaction, and you are able to make that kind of guarantee because, and this is significant, because the buyer does accept the risk associated with ordinary price losses. Meaning, if the price just goes down, the buyer is going to lose. The only thing he's getting a guarantee on is the quality of the merchandise. If he were to get a guarantee on the price, then everybody would agree that would be problematic.
But he gets a guarantee if the product goes bad, the rain falls
exactly,
on it,
exactly.
The building falls apart.
Correct. He has a guarantee basically for anything other than price changes, and that is enough. We say that we're not going to call that a ribis transaction.
Okay.
All right. Have a great day. Looking forward. Wonderful having you, Stacey. Hopefully, we look forward to learning with you many more times together. Have a wonderful day. Be well. Same time tomorrow.
Same time, same place, same channel.
Exactly.
The vaccine.